Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and of course you can find us online at tertiumquids.org, and it goes about once a week. I'll get an email saying, could you please spell Tertium Quids for me? TertiumQuids. .org. And you can find podcasts and information about our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings, some great policy advocacy that we do here at the Virginia Institute, and some really good educational pieces that you can share with your friends to give insight into some of the stuff we discuss here. It is fairly common knowledge that a lot of the prosperity that America saw come about in the 50s and into the early 60s, much of it was driven by the GI Bill and opportunities for veterans to get more education than they had gone into the military with. And joining us for our first segment this morning is from Town Hall Magazine, Peter Murphy, and he is the Vice President for Policy at the Invest in Education Foundation, wrote a great column for Town Hall Magazine on the subject of military educational opportunities for military men, women, and their families to expand their educational opportunities. Peter, thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great, Joe. Thanks so much for having me on.
Not at all. And these are men and women who have volunteered to stand in front of hostile fire. And so much time lately in the news is given to the issues with the Veterans Affairs Administration and their medical mismanagements and the inability to get care to these men and women. But you bring up an interesting point about our nation's security, and I'm quoting your column here. Our nation's security and the education of its children are two critically important issues that coincide with the need to ensure quality education opportunities. So you're not just talking about the soldiers, but you're talking about the children of these families as well.
Well, exactly. And, you know, the VA, of course, that you just mentioned, they deal with veterans, mostly senior citizens, healthcare needs, which become more acute as you get older, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That's an enormous issue. But what this issue deals with primarily are men and women who still wear the uniform and who have some years in the service, who've been in, who we've invested in, and who we are very reliant upon as a nation to defend our nation, to bring that experience and that quality and that training that they have pursued over the years to remain in the service. And what happens is many of them join in their late teens, early 20s, and they become childbearing age, and their interests differ. And civilian life is a lot more appealing, and and we have a real issue to keep those experienced people we've invested in defending our country and in the service and not losing that experience and technical training. But they're having kids, they have families, they have broader interests than themselves, and we've got to address those needs in a more effective way in this country. So education is central, of course, to a child's life, and that's where the focus is in our efforts.
Now, your column posts some stunning figures. 4% in your column here, 4% of the military-connected children are educated in the Department of Defense-operated schools on the military bases. Only 4%. That seems like a stunningly small number.
Well, what's happened over the years, it used to be a lot higher, and as the country itself has gotten larger, as communities have expanded, call it suburban sprawl or whatever, but, the country has built up over the decades and so the need for actual Defense Department-operated schools has lessened. I mean, they're still out there, but very few of them remain. Most military families live, in a community, and, work on a base or work in an office building or wherever they work. And, but the key thing there is they have to move around. Their lives are disrupted frequently. They get transfers, they get deployed, and their kids are left, going to different schools, facing enormous disruption. I mean, military families, I don't have to remind you and your audience, they face enormous sacrifice and disruption.
Oh, yeah.
And as we deal with the sacrifices of our military personnel, we can't overlook their families. And so, the thing that we're trying to do here is at least mitigate the educational challenges that these families face, especially if they have to move someplace and really can't find a satisfactory public school district. That's the opportunity that we can make for them to improve on that situation, to give them other options, to give them the means by which they can actually get an alternative, more suitable educational opportunity for their child.
Peter, it almost sounds like you're talking about what we discuss frequently when we talk about school choice in the civilian communities. Is that what you're talking about? Because it also, it seems like you've brought up to the fact that a higher than national average percentage of students are homeschooled through military families, which seems like quite a burden to take on themselves. But as you describe it, maybe not so much if it's just easier for a parent to say, I'm going to homeschool. That way, if we need to move location, it's a little easier. Are you describing perhaps somewhat like a school choice program for the military?
Yes, that's exactly right. And in this case, the vehicle to use that really works for this population, we think, is to set up what's called an educational savings account, an ESA, education savings account of federal money for military families if they choose to tap into and pay for another educational option. So they could take it, for instance, and pay for private school tuition. They can use it for homeschool expenses, which, as you point out from the article, military families homeschool their kids at twice the national average. I think it's 7% versus 3 or 4%.
Wow.
In the civilian population. So that's one reaction to the situation they are facing. At least that provides some continuity of educational experience for their children, but that's a burden in all by itself. And there's lots of ways you can supplement and improve homeschooling. You can provide online coursework. You can pay a school district for specific courses. I mean, even that's an option under this legislation that's being proposed to provide a military educational savings account for families. Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana proposed this bill, H.R. 5199. And that would provide this ESA option. And it's really it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of our readiness problems. It's not going to, address every family's needs, perhaps, but it's a big step forward, and we think it's really time Congress act on it.
Well, and you mentioned earlier on, Peter, the stress on a military family is more than any of the civilian population could ever imagine, on top of then, the traditional, I need to find a school, I need to find a good school, I want to make sure my kids have every opportunity. So just being able to step into this, do you think this could wind up being a model for school choice beyond the military if it's successful?
Well, in fact, one of the things that we're looking at the federal level is what's worked well in the states. The states have been these laboratories of innovation, of policy, as particularly on educational choice. So we've worked on several issues in Congress that have really proven themselves very effective at the state level. This is just one example. There are about half a dozen states right now, Joe, that have an education savings account, and most of them are modeled for a specific population. I think Tennessee and Nevada, they have ESAs for special needs students. I think Mississippi has one now. So they're starting to turn up at the state level, and we think this is an ideal vehicle to administer at the federal level for a very direct federal responsibility, and that is military personnel and defense. So that's what we're really adopting. It's the states that really did this well at that level, and it's something the federal government should learn from and mimic at least for our military.
Peter Murphy is the Vice President for Policy at the Invest in Education Foundation. Peter, we're talking a little bit about the idea of education savings accounts for military families and specifically the children of our active duty military who are struggling right now with this. But you also addressed something earlier, which is retention of the trained military, whether it be a serviceman or woman who's got expertise in specific things, retiring out after a smaller number of years than perhaps we would like, or we could use certainly their expertise longer because they want to attend their family more. They want to have that quote normal life. Have you done digging that would sociologically tell you that this is one of the issues that that military people look at as a reason for finishing up, whether it be after a 4 or 8 year or even a little bit longer, instead of making it a career?
Well, in fact, the Ed Choice out of Indianapolis commissioned a pretty extensive poll of 1,200 military personnel. These polls are not all that common, and they found that there was support for an education savings account to help with educational needs of their children by something like 72 to 15. I mean, it's overwhelmingly supported by military personnel. I know the Military Times, about 6 months to a year ago, did a survey on this very issue of what would basically having to do with reasons for leaving the military, education of the children. More than 1/3 of respondents to that said, this is a big issue in deciding whether or not they're going to stay. So there's a real need to preclude an exodus from the military. And one of the things that we're up against right now is we have a growing economy. I mean, the economy, by a number of measures, is doing the best it has in a dozen years. That's going to bring challenges right there, insofar as the competition with the civilian workforce is going to pick up even more. When the economy is poor, enlistments are up. When the economy is booming, there's more opportunity outside the military, both for high school graduates but also for people who have that experience and can fly in a civilian airline as opposed to being a pilot in the military.
Sure.
So these are competitive factors that we've just got to make it worthwhile for the right people and quality people to stay.
I hadn't thought about it that way. We've often talked about hiring military men or women as you're already getting somebody who's pre-qualified with discipline and teamwork and things that most employers would say are a great asset to their business, whatever the specifics of it are. But you've circled it back, saying, wouldn't it be great for all that experience to stay in the military if we need it?
It's how you have a capable, lethal fighting force. There's so much technical know-how required in every branch of the military that they're almost a universe unto themselves. There's all kinds of support services and satellite technology. I mean, you can weaponry. You just go on and on. You need smart, expert people operating those things. And when they're in their late 20s and early 30s, I mean, again, their family issues are taking a much bigger importance than perhaps when they first enlisted. So it's just something we have to be cognizant of, and this is a great step to do that in passing Congressman Banks' bill, H.R. 5199, and getting that on the law, and just giving our military, another reason to stay and provide a better educational opportunity for the children.
Now, it certainly seems like, given some of the things I've heard Betsy DeVos say at the Department of Education, that the president would be of the mind to sign a bill like this if it got to his desk. So that's good news. What about the Senate side? It seems like over time, and not to get into the meat and potatoes of something that's become a whipping post here frequently, which is the inability of the Senate to act on all these bills that the House sends over to it. What sort of support do you think you could get in the U.S. Senate for something like this?
Well, Ben Sasse from Nebraska, Senator Ben Sasse, has his version, which is almost identical. His version of legislation in the Senate, it's Senate Bill 2517. And he's got a couple co-sponsors with him. But as you point out, it's often a graveyard of legislative activity. The House is a good place to start, and then the bills go to die in the Senate. But that can't be an excuse for inaction. And the House, passage of this bill can be an enormous first step. And let's not presume or preclude on what the Senate may or may not do. I think we start with the House, try to get something done there, and build on that, because ultimately it comes down to horse trading. Deals are made, and we saw the military get an infusion of money in the last budget, because of horse trading, and that's really what this comes down to. Unfortunately, there is opposition, because anything that smacks of school choice educational opportunity that's outside the kind of traditional system often meets resistance from those who operate in the traditional system.
Yeah, it's the
school administrators, teacher union bosses. They don't. It doesn't matter the virtues of helping our military families. It doesn't matter to them the readiness issue. They just don't want any opportunity outside of the system they control, and that's what we're really bumping up against. So
that's a shame.
There's challenges in even getting it passed in the House.
And they probably see this as as some sort of incubator where if this works here, then it expands out, because now there's a approval. I can see all the logical reasons that an education profiteer would want to protect their little fiefdom against this. But talk about the human impact. We talk about military, keeping folks in the military, and certainly those who are stationed here. But deployment, I'm sure this would ease the battlefield stress of a deployed soldier, knowing that their spouse has the support of some educational funds that will help them while they're deployed, even, and give that spouse at home an opportunity to help out with the kids. Is that a sidebar to this? Have you considered that as well?
Well, it certainly is, because when you don't have the two parents at home, you have challenges all their own, and that's what many military families face when the spouse is overseas for a 6-month deployment. You're flying solo at home with your children's educational needs and every other needs that the children have. And so this can ease that challenge, especially, again, if you're in a school that just does not work for your child. I mean, that's the biggest thing. For most families, public school systems where they live do just fine. But for many, they don't. And for our military, that's a problem.
Right. It seems like
that can lead to a complete departure from the military by quality people that we need there.
And a stress that we certainly don't want to be adding other stresses back on the home front when they're facing some of the most brutal situations in their deployments or in their military duties. Peter, last question. The fiscal hawks that run around and anything that comes up of this, somebody's going to say, well, where are you going to get the money? And I can even hear guys like Mark Warner saying that, because if it's school choice, he's got to come up with some reason to oppose it or something like that. And he all of a sudden gets his fiscal hawkiness on. What kind of budgetary impact are you talking about this having, or is it something that we can actually come up with without having to expand a lot of things?
Well, Senator Warner has voted for this massive overspending at every level of the federal government, including money just thrown at the Department of Education that the administration didn't want or needed, that the most of Congress didn't want or needed. So there's lots of money in the Department of Education department alone that can be trimmed to pay for something like this program, which addresses a specific need with an important subset of our population. It's something Mark Warner should get behind. It's something Tim Kaine should get behind. I unfortunately don't have a lot of confidence that they will, but I hope they surprise us, because they can't. We cannot let ideological opposition to a school choice vehicle out of fear that it might succeed.
Which is unfortunate.
You alluded to it earlier. Why do these teacher unions and their politicians that they own, why are they opposing things like this? Because of fear of success.
Yep.
That's why. And it's outrageous. And it shouldn't be tolerated. Virginians should know that. And so there's the program in itself is very modest. I mean, this is probably estimated anywhere from $10 to $20 million, maybe even more than that, which sounds like a lot of money at the county level. At the federal level, it's lost in rounding. I mean, it's a very modest program. It's a modest, inexpensive way to address a critical need.
Yeah.
And one proposal is to use existing funds to just shift them and let them follow the child to where the child's going to get their education. So it doesn't have to be a net increase at all at the federal level, which is how Congressman Banks actually designed his bill.
And he's very good at that, and I hope that both of them can find their way to the floor, because that's where I think a lot of this legislation, they bury it in committee so nobody ever has to be seen by their constituents voting on something, Peter. And I appreciate it. We're going to continue to track. Give the listeners those bill numbers again so they can contact Tim Kaine, Mark Warner, Congressman Garrett, Congressman Bratt, or Goodlatte,
right,
and push them on this.
Absolutely. So the House bill is H.R. 5199. The Senate bill number is 2517. That's 2517. And that would be tremendous for your listeners to get active and make some calls. I mean, politicians notice when their phones light up.
Yeah, Scott Taylor, another, is
absolutely.
Morgan Griffith.
Some of them, I think David Bratt, for instance, I think he's co-sponsoring the Banks bill. And we appreciate anybody who co-sponsors, but that's just putting your name on something. Getting it actually passed, that's a whole other level of activity that we need to get moving on.
Amen to that. Peter Murphy, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for taking some time out with us from the Invest in Education Foundation, Vice President there. We appreciate it. We will follow these bills. We'll put some effort behind pushing on our congressional leaders, and who knows, it may even wind up being a Senate campaign issue come November in that race. But thank you so much for what you do in bringing this out. We'll share the town hall story on our social media account as well, and we'll let you know as that goes forward. But thank you, sir, for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Joe, thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.